If a manager is honest and he has this natural enthusiasm, I think whilst he can't go into the field with the players, he can convey it to the players, you understand? He's with them and they're with him, and they'll be successful.
When Bill Shankly found Liverpool, he found a decrepit club languishing in the second division. When it was time for him to bid the club goodbye, an empire had been built. This is the start of that story. Liverpool Football Club was born out of Everton. It was their president, John Holding, who bought Anfield from Joseph Orrell Jr. for the whopping fee of £5,228, 11 shillings and 11 pence. Then, when the club refused to pay an annual rent of £250, Holding went off in a strop and formed a new football club, and he named it after the city he was in, Liverpool. The early history of rocking back and forth between the top two divisions was culled with the recruitment of Sunderland manager Tom Watson. Watson gave the club their red shirts and 2 league titles in spite of a relegation in between the 2 championships of 1901 and 1906. Just as Alex Reyes-Beck was succeeded as Anfield's hero by goalkeeper Alicia Scott, Tom Watson's mantle was taken on by David Ashworth, who delivered 2 more league titles in succession in 1922 and 23. This time there was a stability about Liverpool as they remained in the top flight until the sport's postponement amid World War II. But there's something about Liverpool: when adversity meets the club and the city, they rally. Although George Kay couldn't squeeze a second championship out of the club as his predecessors did, his title-winning vintage of 1947 was arguably the most important. He acquired Albert Stubbins to bang in the goals, and together with George Kay, Liverpool was rebuilt after the ashes of war. But there was something missing, a gaping hole where the FA Cup belonged. Liverpool had got to the showpiece event's final, but in losing efforts before the First World War against Burnley and in 1950 against Arsenal, not only could their Stanley Park neighbours Everton lord that fact over them, they'd also matched Liverpool's 5 league titles. It couldn't even be said that Liverpool were the best team in their own city, never mind the country. And then George Kay had to resign through ill health in 1951. From there, Liverpool's fate was sealed. Don Welsh took over and couldn't stop the rot. Liverpool were dumped out of the FA Cup at the first hurdle to lowly Gateshead and only just staved off relegation in his first campaign. They wouldn't receive a second chance. Don Welsh would receive a second chance, but after 2 failed attempts at returning Liverpool to the top flight, he was sacked in 1956, replaced by Phil Taylor. No, not that one. Phil Taylor's team might not have been successful on the pitch, as an FA Cup shock defeat to Worcester City attests to in the plainest of methods. However, he did some good for the club in that he hired Ruben Bennett and Joe Fagan onto the coaching staff. Whilst Taylor wouldn't see the boot room during his time at the club, his successor would. Bill Shankly was born in Glenbrook, just south of Glasgow, in 1913. As was the style in those days, he was sent down the local mines from the ripe old age of 14. Thankfully for him and the world, he broke out of that traditional spiral through the medium of football, starting out professionally at Carlisle United. Carlisle was used as a stepping stone in his playing career so Shankly could get to Preston. Then, whilst at Deepdale, Shankly used that club as a stepping stone to begin his managerial career at Carlisle United. In a move that wouldn't be seen these days, Carlisle's manager's post only became available when their player-manager Ivor Brodis sold himself to Sunderland. Shankly applied for and got the post as his successor and subsequently revolutionised the club, or tried to. In improving their training schedule, Carlisle inched closer and closer to the second division. Under Shankly, Carlisle received a spot of attention in the FA Cup in reaching the 3rd round against both Arsenal and Leeds United. What should have been a treasure chest waiting for Shankly to improve the club never arrived, and Shankly never did get the club to Division 2, splitting after he felt the board was skimping out on bonuses for the players. It'd take Carlisle until 1965 to reach the second division after the Football League's reformatting of 1958 placed them into the 4th tier. In his time out of work, Bill Shankly speculatively applied for the post of First Division club Liverpool, for a Third Division North manager to demand the lofty 5-time champions Liverpool the right to give him total control. It was ballsy and cost him his first opportunity at Anfield. Instead, a couple of sideways steps. First to Grimsby, where he coincidentally almost buys Joe Fagan. Still, after getting his new club achingly close to the second tier with 2 top 5 finishers, he departs under the same dark cloud as he had done at Carlisle. It turns out that post-war northern teams weren't willing to part with cash in order to improve their status. The same headache could be found at Workington, as Shankly saved the club from a desperate situation in 1955. Shankly then himself was saved by an old pal from Preston, Andy Beattie, who offered him a spot in a testimonial match at Leeds Road, the ground of Huddersfield Town. After getting back in contact with Beattie, Shankly made an enormous leap of faith, becoming his assistant at Huddersfield Town. By hook or by crook, Shankly had got himself beyond the second division and into the top flight of first-team English football. As part of his duties in West Yorkshire, Shankly would govern the Huddersfield reserve team, which is where he and Beattie fell out. Shankly made sure he had power. Beattie didn't particularly like that, and with the resignation of Beattie weeks after Huddersfield's relegation from the top flight, Shankly completed his circuitous route to managing a second division football team. He got to work immediately, changed training at another club. He nurtured young talent through another club, this time in a club that featured Dennis Law and Ray Wilson. And yet he discovered a boardroom unwilling to cooperate. Shankly's long-term vision of taking the club back to the top tier apparently didn't warrant this kind of investment that was needed. Shankly had stabilised the club, but admittedly he hadn't been wholly successful in getting Huddersfield into the promotion conversation. Everything spun on an October 4th, 1958 fixture between Huddersfield Town and Liverpool at Leeds Road. The visiting Reds were slapped for 5, and forevermore Shankly and Liverpool would be intertwined. Whilst Town finished a disappointing 14th, their worst return under Shankly, that one fixture ensured it would be Shankly's most profitable campaign as a manager yet. A year and 13 days after that initial thrashing, Shankly is approached by 2 men named TV Williams and Harry Latham. They ask him, "How would you like to manage the best club in the country?" And Shankly's response, "Why, is Matt Busby packing up?" Those 2 men were the chairman and director of Liverpool, and so was born a legend of Liverpool Football Club on a quip that Manchester United were the biggest football club in England. A few lines in the odd national newspaper greeted Bill Shankly's appointment to second division Liverpool. He worked tirelessly from his arrival in December 1959 to ensure that his shock retirement 15 years later would read like the obituary of a monarch. The arrival came mere days after Shankly's Huddersfield had beaten Liverpool at Leeds Road for the 3rd season running. Whilst the infrastructure implied that the club was on shaky foundations, what with Anfield being called the biggest toilet in Liverpool according to the new manager, and a training ground with no running water, the kind of facilities you'd expect from a 2025 Manchester United, there was hope though. Hope in the coaching staff waiting for Shankly upon his arrival. Bob Paisley, Joe Fagan and Ruben Bennett were the 3 pillars of the club staff that would join Shankly on the incredible journey. Not that there wasn't a ludicrous amount of work to be done. In a way, it mirrored what the city was experiencing as council estates sprouted up in places like Halewood and Croxteth in an attempt to rejuvenate Liverpool after the war. The city was changing and Shankly was hoping the football club wouldn't be far behind. Shankly found a coaching staff that were completely in sync to his revolutionary ideas. This bond was formed on the back of deep discussions about the club and of the game, performed on a daily basis, that birthed the boot room. Methods that are commonplace these days, from individual training regimes and actually scouting the opposition, were alien ideas drilled into the club by Shankly. Endless running was stitched for small-sided games and training that focused on ball work. Not that it was successful on the pitch, as Shankly's Liverpool were destroyed 4-0 by Cardiff City in his first match in front of the Kop. Just 1 place off the promotion places, but a distant 8 points behind Cardiff, Shankly had at least discovered a core of players that would take him through. Ronnie Moran and Jerry Byrne in defence, Roger Hunt up front and Ian Callaghan was being fast-tracked to join them in midfield. That summer, Shankly was priced out of a Dennis Law reunion as Liverpool's £18,000 bid was nowhere near the £65,000 Huddersfield eventually got out of Manchester City, which helped pay for the club's floodlights. That was a case of fair enough. Law couldn't spend much more time in the second division, but when Jack Charlton was missed out on, Shankly began to fear that he was running into the same roadblocks he had done at his previous management jobs. The Leeds defender had become available for £20,000, which wasn't compatible with Liverpool's archaic transfer bid limit of £18,000. The board would not be budged and Shankly missed out on his #1 defensive target. Shankly likened his directors to gamblers who were too afraid to bet anymore, but Liverpool were a club that needed to gamble. Shankly knew the 1960s was going to be a defining decade in English football. The abolishment of the maximum wage was coming and the strong were only going to get stronger. The biggest clubs in the English game would be crystallised if they were at the top of their game in the upcoming decade. Ultimately, Shankly did get names through the door. Kevin Lewis in the place of the ageing legend Billy Liddell, whilst Gordon Milne's £16,000 transfer broke a club record. He simply had to do, even if Shankly wasn't wholly satisfied that he was the commanding defender that Liverpool needed. Meanwhile, Everton were throwing money around like nobody's business, which earned them the moniker of the Mersey Millionaires. Everton were bankrolled by the founder of Littlewood's Pools, John Moores. Littlewood's more recently famous for being a catalogue that your mum could max out on when she wanted some shite perfume. The fate of both clubs would hinge on Littlewood's at the start of the 60s. When the decade started, John Moores was sitting on the boards of both Everton and Liverpool, a position becoming less viable due to how richer and more important the game had become. Therefore, he had to nominate somebody to take Littlewood's interest on the Liverpool board. Enter Eric Sawyer, a man who deserves to sit alongside those at the very top of Liverpool's history, for he changed the club. He knew the potential of Bill Shankly as the club's manager and he matched the great man's ambitions and demands. The transfer fee cap was eliminated and so were the ridiculously stringent rules that every prospective signing had to be over 6 foot tall and be scouted by at least 2 directors. He told Shankly, "If you can get the players, I will get you the money." The finances were restructured as the basic wage was lowered in favour of improving bonuses that was designed to get players incentivised. In the 1960-61 campaign, Liverpool improved by 2 points but was still prohibited by the 58-point mark that handed promotion to Ipswich Town and Sheffield United, as Shankly finished third once again. That summer though, Shankly had finally seen a boardroom promise fulfilled when the 2 long-term targets of Ian St John and Ron Yates were acquired. Yates, a rock at the back for Dundee United, was needed to solidify the club defensively, while St John of Motherwell's front line would improve Liverpool going forward. £67,500 was needed to get them through the door, a comparative splurge for the Anfield outfit. Shankly promised directors who tried to thwart the transfers that the 2 additions, both aged 23 and in their peak years, would gain them promotion. The intent was obvious out of the blocks, dropping just 1 point from their first 11 matches. Roger Hunt had been transformed from a decent striker who bagged every other game to one who was scoring 31 goals in as many matches. Liverpool would go one short of a century of goals while simultaneously improving their defensive numbers by 15 to gain promotion as second division champions with an impressive 62 points. Shankly also promised the club that both St John and Yates would win them the cup. Shankly made his best go at the cup yet, but they were narrowly eliminated in the 5th round by his former club Preston after 3 games. But it didn't matter just yet. Liverpool were back in the first division after almost a long decade away, and it was of paramount importance that Bill Shankly had got on the backing of the boardroom. Now they could not only go back to the first division, but could believably challenge for it. It was supposed to be a time of celebration when one of England's great clubs returned to the peak of the sport. Then again, the board stuck their oar in and sold Johnny Morrison without the manager's permission. A stern ultimatum was given to the board by the manager and that kind of shit never happened again. In through the door was Rangers midfielder Willie Stevenson to replace Tommy Leishman, whilst the £37,000 needed to prize Peter Thompson from Preston was called daylight robbery by Shankly. Other debutants included Tommy Lawrence in goal of Vox Pop fame.
I'm just wondering whether you remember the Derby match in 1967 at Goodison FA Cup. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I do. I played in it.
whilst both Tommy Smith and Chris Lawler were knocking on the door from the reserves. An insatiable middle portion of the league season capped by 9 games won on the spin between November 14th and February 16th made up for the sticky beginning and end to the campaign as Liverpool made decent returns in 8th place. And they went achingly close to a 3rd ever cup final where they would be introduced to their bogey team, Leicester City.
Riley takes a free kick for Leicester. Up go the heads, and Mike Stringfellow has the ball in the net. But 1-0, Leicester City win the right to go to Wembley.
Just as Hunt and St John were prolific in front of goal in the Reds' first season back, they were joined by Alf Arrowsmith, a born goalscorer according to Shankly. Together, their trident helped themselves to 67 of Liverpool's 92 goals in the league in a scintillating campaign of football. Successive thrashings against Chelsea and Wolves, as well as a win in the Merseyside derby against champions Everton, marked a September for the ages that proved a springboard for a title challenge. 5s and 6 followed against Wolves, Stoke and Ipswich, whilst a 3-0 demolition job at home to Matt Busby's Manchester United left Shankly on the precipice of the 1964 Championship. After a simple enough win at Turf Moor 10 days later, Liverpool needed just one more triumph to confirm a 6th ever title. Within 7 minutes, there was only going to be one winner. St John, Arrowsmith, Thompson and Hunt all got in the act of a 5-0 disarming of the Gunners. The title won it might have been an unimpeachable domestic double had Swansea Town not stunned Liverpool in the quarter-finals. That holy grail would come, but with qualification into the European Cup, Shankly's team had another competition they were besotted with winning. These were the days of the Kop adopting a Jerry and the Pacemakers track everyone was calling You'll Never Walk Alone. And as the Beatles cracked America, it was the football club's turn to do the same to Europe. Shankly's first championship win was won with the cut and paste tactic of its day, the WM, which simply had to be modified for the European Cup. A back four system was creeping into the English game long behind its continental counterparts, and Shankly went with the times. Liverpool's first European post took them to Iceland, and via flights from Manchester to London, London to Prestwick and Prestwick to Reykjavik, their campaign was allowed to kick off without a hitch in a 5-0 win. One of the more important stylistic changes preempted the next round against Anderlecht, where for the first time Liverpool lined up in all red before a 3-0 victory over the Belgians. After success in Brussels, Liverpool needed 3 games to take care of FC Köln, but couldn't, drawing 2-2 in neutral Rotterdam after 2 goalless draws. It meant that Liverpool's fate in Europe was settled on the toss of a coin, and thanks to Ron Yates' call of tails, the club were through to the semi-final. The reigning champions Inter Milan were next, and in only Anfield's 3rd ever European night came one of its most famous, as Hunt, Carragher and St John contrived to dispose of Inter 3-1. They were never going to be allowed to win the match in Milan, however. You might not be surprised to learn that referee Ortiz de Mendeville was later embroiled in a match-fixing scandal, which Liverpool fans could have told the world after some questionable decisions in the San Siro. League form, it has to be said, was stymied by a gruelling US tour in pre-season, a mistake that Shankly wouldn't repeat as Liverpool regressed to 7th place. The season, which kicked off with their participation in the first ever fixture shown on Match of the Day, a 3-2 win over Arsenal, ended with success as well. Because finally, Liverpool had shaken the FA Cup monkey from their back when they met Don Revie's Leeds at Wembley.
Here comes Bird. Yes, a goal! Oh, there's Charlton up for the attack. Now Bremner, he's equalised. Too far, it's a goal! There they are, cream of Europe, so they say.
And it ought to have been another glorious honeymoon for Shankly and Liverpool, but the manager was faced with yet more deplorable actions from on high. A bonus had been agreed for whenever Anfield gates ticked over 50,000 spectators, yet the board weren't willing to part with that same bonus for a cup final that was played out in front of over double that number at Wembley. Shankly didn't get what he, the staff or players deserved, but at least we got this soundbite when he said, "At a football club, there's a holy trinity, the players, the managers and the supporters. Directors don't come into it. They are only there to sign the cheques." After recuperating in the off-season, Liverpool went again with a squad of just 14 players. Long gone were the days of Shankly sifting through a bloated squad in the second tier that could boast 40 names. Now Liverpool operated on a shoestring team that was only capable of reaching the pinnacle of English football because of their supreme fitness. Over the course of the 1965-66 campaign, Liverpool fielded 14 players in the league. Even then, Bobby Graham only featured once and Alf Arrowsmith was fielded 5 times as 9 players featured in 40 or more fixtures. The foundation of which was circuit training and small-sided games. Joe Fagan and Ruben Bennett carried out the training which Shankly devised, and, as the season wore on, the stronger Liverpool got. 4 losses from the first 14 league games, admittedly in a stretch that included an emphatic 5-0 win against Everton, became just 3 from their final 28 fixtures. Liverpool topped the table from December and never let go. 6 points ahead of Leeds and Burnley, Liverpool were champions for the 7th time. They were confirmed as such in the penultimate game of the season against Chelsea. So confident were their opponents of losing the game that they gave them a guard of honour pre-match. Roger Hunt's second-half double in a 2-1 victory confirmed the title later that afternoon. Whilst they would make a hash of their FA Cup defence, losing at the first hurdle to that very same Chelsea, there was another run for the ages in the Cup Winners' Cup, and this time Liverpool made a European final. Through the Italian revenge over Juventus and the triumphs over Standard Liège and Honved, Liverpool were poised for an enormous Battle of Britain against Jock Stein's Celtic.
Celtic challenging all the way before losing out by dint of a disallowed goal against Liverpool in the semi-final,
which they won after 2 quick-fire goals back at Anfield. They'd return up north for the final against Borussia Dortmund at Hampden, where only the bizarre and the mystical could stop them now.
Eines Tages wieder auftauchte. Jetzt hat HELPP seine Möglichkeit und trifft so den Kopf von Lawler. Die Budas Ball senkt sich ins Tor.
Liverpool had dabbled in success beforehand. Tom Watson and David Ashworth had presided over eras like this in the past, but this was another plane entirely. Liverpool had won everything there was to win at home. They were a team ready for European success, and in an era where winning anything was infinitely more difficult. Liverpool Football Club had not been designed for this. The level of scrutiny and level of demand for tickets for cup finals and European away days was likely a major factor in the death of club secretary Jimmy McInnes, who was found dead in an archway in the Kop. Shankly was devastated. He had taken a ramshackle club, fought diligently against everything that conspired against he and the club to provide an immediately healthy future in which he knew they had to have for Liverpool to have one of the biggest clubs in world football. They had to go and break the bank to sign Ian St John and Ron Yates because they simply put could not belong in the second division for much longer in the 60s. All the while, teams like Matt Busby's Manchester United, Bill Nicholson's Tottenham Hotspur and Harry Catterick's Everton were becoming the best in the land. Then you've got Stan Cullis and Wolves, Alf Ramsey and Ipswich and Don Revie and Leeds United. There's also Bertie Mee at Arsenal, Joe Mercer at Man City and Brian Clough coming through the ranks. Liverpool needed a strong figure to act now so they could become the behemoth they wanted to be. And the first part, easy enough. Liverpool had ended their FA Cup hoodoo. They'd edged themselves in front of the chasing pack as the most successful English League Cup in history with 7 titles, and they dabbled in European football. The next bit was the hard part, the rebuild, but if you want to skip to the end of the story, watch this one, our video on Kenny Dalglish's management of the club and the death of the boot room.